In a summer downpour, Jungkook drags Jimin through neon streets. Laughter, hidden fears, and one confession that changes everything. The rain hit the pavement so hard it sounded like applause when Jungkook grabbed Jimin's wrist and shouted, "Run before the lights change." Jimin barely had time to protest before he was pulled off the curb and into the shimmering blur of the street, sneakers splashing through warm puddles as the red traffic light reflected across the wet asphalt like a broken mirror. Cars honked somewhere behind them, but Jungkook only laughed, bright, breathless, reckless. "Are you insane?" Jimin yelled between gasps. "Probably," Jungkook called over his shoulder. The city smelled like wet concrete and summer heat that refused to disappear even under the storm. Streetlights flickered above them, casting halos through the falling rain. Jimin's hair clung to his forehead, water sliding down his neck beneath the collar of his shirt. Jungkook finally slowed beneath a crooked street lamp at the end of the block. His hand was still wrapped around Jimin's wrist, warm despite the rain. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Their breathing filled the narrow street, mixing with the steady drumming of rain on metal rooftops. Then Jungkook started laughing again. Not the polite laugh he used around strangers, but the full one, the kind that made his shoulders shake and his eyes disappear into crescents. Jimin tried to glare at him. It didn't last. "You dragged me through traffic for that," he said. "For the rain. That's not a reason." Jungkook tilted his head up, letting the rain hit his face. Drops ran along his jawline and down his neck. "It is tonight." Jimin watched him quietly. Jungkook had always been strange in small ways. He tapped rhythms on tables when he thought no one noticed. He stared too long at sunsets. He hummed melodies without finishing them. But tonight something about him felt different. Restless, like a storm had been building somewhere inside him. "You skipped practice," Jimin said softly. Jungkook didn't answer right away. Instead, he kicked at a puddle, sending ripples across the streetlight's reflection. "I needed air." "That's not like you." "I know." The rain softened slightly, turning from a downpour into a steady whisper. Somewhere far away, thunder rolled across the city like distant drums. Jimin crossed his arms. "You're hiding something." Jungkook looked up again, and the playful energy faded from his expression. "Do you ever feel like your life is moving too fast?" he asked. Jimin blinked. "What?" "Like you're standing on a train that never stops." Jungkook rubbed the back of his neck. "Everyone expects you to keep moving, smiling, being the same person forever." Jimin studied him carefully. This wasn't the Jungkook who joked through everything. "What happened?" Jimin asked. Jungkook didn't answer directly. Instead, he stepped closer until the streetlight framed both of them in pale gold. "I realized something today." "What?" "That I'm scared." Jimin laughed quietly. "You, the guy who jumps off stages and climbs rooftops." "Exactly." The rain tapped gently against the metal street sign above them. Jimin's voice softened. "Scared of what?" Jungkook hesitated. His eyes moved across Jimin's face like he was memorizing something. "Losing the only person who understands me." The words landed between them. Jimin felt something tighten in his chest. "Whom?" he asked. Jungkook didn't answer. Instead, he suddenly grabbed Jimin's hand again and started walking. Not running this time. Just walking slowly through the quiet street. Their shoulders brushed occasionally. The rain cooled the air, but the city still radiated warmth from the day's heat. Jimin could hear Jungkook's breathing again, uneven, thoughtful. "You remember the first summer we met?" Jungkook asked. "Of course," Jimin said. They had been younger then, wandering through practice rooms that smelled like old wood and sweat. Jungkook had been shy at first, hiding behind big eyes and awkward smiles. But Jimin remembered the moment that changed. It had rained that day too. Jungkook had dragged him outside after rehearsal, just to stand in the storm. You said rain made the world quieter, Jimin said. Jungkook smiled faintly. You remember. You say strange things, they stick. They reached a small park where water dripped from trees onto the empty benches. Jungkook sat down first, elbows resting on his knees. Jimin sat beside him. The rain pattered softly through the leaves above. You always know what I'm thinking, Jungkook said. Not always. More than anyone else. Jimin shrugged. Maybe you're just easy to read. Jungkook turned toward him. I'm not joking. Jimin met his gaze. The seriousness that made his pulse stumble. What is this really about? Jimin asked quietly. Jungkook inhaled slowly. I've been pretending something isn't real. And tonight you decided to stop. Yeah. A car passed on the distant road, its headlights briefly painting the park in white before fading again. Jimin's heart beat harder. You're making this dramatic, he said, trying to lighten the moment. Jungkook smiled a little. You always do that when you're nervous. I'm not nervous. You're rubbing your thumb against your sleeve. Jimin froze. Jungkook chuckled softly. See. Silence settled between them again. Then Jungkook spoke. I think I've been in love with you for a long time. The rain didn't stop. But for Jimin, the entire world seemed to pause. He stared at Jungkook, searching his face for the hint of a joke. There wasn't one. Jungkook looked terrified. I didn't mean to, he continued quickly. It just happened slowly, every time you laughed, every time you stayed late to help me, every time you understood what I couldn't explain. Jimin's throat tightened. Jungkook. I know it could ruin everything, Jungkook said. That's why I kept quiet. His fingers curled together nervously. But today, I realized something worse could happen. What? I could spend my whole life pretending. The rain grew slightly heavier again, droplets bouncing off the bench between them. Jimin looked down at his hands. His mind replayed years of small moments. Late-night conversations. Shared headphones. Jungkook falling asleep on his shoulder during long rides. The way his heart had always reacted without explanation. Why tell me tonight? Jimin asked softly. Jungkook looked up at the glowing streetlight through the trees. Because the rain makes things honest. Jimin laughed quietly despite himself. That's still a strange reason. Maybe. Jungkook turned back toward him, eyes uncertain. I don't expect anything, he said. I just didn't want to hide from you anymore. For a long moment, Jimin said nothing. Then he leaned back against the bench and exhaled slowly. You know what scares me, he said. Jungkook shook his head. That I might have been waiting for you to say that. Jungkook blinked. What? Jimin smiled faintly, rain sliding down his cheeks. I thought I was the only one pretending. The silence that followed was softer now, filled with something warm and fragile. Jungkook's expression slowly changed from confusion to disbelief. Then to something brighter. You're serious. Jimin nudged his shoulder. Don't make me repeat it. Jungkook laughed, quieter this time, almost disbelieving. The rain began to ease, leaving only scattered droplets falling from leaves. Jungkook looked up at the clearing sky. Funny, he murmured. What? I thought tonight would be the scariest moment of my life. And Jungkook turned back to him. It's actually the best. Jimin rolled his eyes gently. You're dramatic. You ran through traffic with me. That was your fault. Jungkook stood and offered his hand. Come on. Where now? Jungkook grinned. Anywhere the rain takes us. Jimin took his hand, feeling the warmth of it even in the cooling air. They walked out of the park together as the storm slowly faded behind them, the wet city glowing under streetlights like a quiet promise neither of them needed to hide from anymore. The rain had thinned into a mist by the time they left the park, but the city still glowed as if the storm had washed every color brighter. Water ran along the gutters in thin rivers, reflecting the streetlights in trembling gold lines. Jungkook still hadn't let go of Jimin's hand. Neither of them seemed ready to mention it. They walked slowly, sneakers splashing through shallow puddles, the quiet between them thick with something new and fragile. Jimin cleared his throat. You know this is weird, right? Jungkook looked sideways at him. Weird how? You just confessed you've been in love with me for years, and now you're acting like we're casually walking home from a grocery store. Jungkook laughed under his breath. What do you want me to do? Dramatic speech, fall to my knees in the rain. Please don't. See, Jungkook nudged him with his shoulder. You're impossible. Jimin didn't respond immediately. His eyes drifted across the quiet street, but his thoughts were miles away. The confession had cracked open, something he had spent years carefully ignoring. Because the truth was uncomfortable and complicated. You're too calm, Jungkook said suddenly. Jimin blinked. What? You didn't freak out, you didn't run away. Jungkook studied his face carefully. That's suspicious. I said I might feel the same. Might. Don't push it. Jungkook grinned slightly. So you admit it. Jimin sighed. You're unbearable. Yet here you are. Jimin stopped walking. Jungkook took 2 more steps before noticing and turning back. The streetlight above them flickered once, bathing Jimin's face in uneven light. Jungkook, he said quietly. Something in his tone erased the playful mood. Jungkook's smile faded. What? You understand what this means, right? Jungkook frowned slightly. What do you mean? This isn't simple. I didn't think it was. Jimin ran a hand through his wet hair, pushing it away from his face. We work together, our lives are tangled together in ways most people don't understand. His voice dropped slightly. If this gets messy, it doesn't just affect us. Jungkook's expression hardened a little. You think I don't know that? I'm just saying. I've thought about this for years, Jimin. The quiet intensity in Jungkook's voice made Jimin pause. You think tonight was spontaneous, Jungkook continued. You think I woke up this morning and suddenly decided to confess in the rain. Jimin opened his mouth but didn't answer. Jungkook stepped closer. I've fought this feeling more times than you can imagine, he said. I tried ignoring it. I tried convincing myself it was temporary. I even tried avoiding you for a while. Jimin's eyes widened slightly. You what? You remember that month when I suddenly started staying late at the studio? Yes. That was me trying to get space from you. Jimin stared at him. You never told me that. Because it didn't work. Jimin exhaled slowly. You're unbelievable. Jungkook shrugged, and yet you're still here. Jimin looked away. The tension between them was no longer light or playful. It felt sharp. Dangerous. Why didn't you tell me earlier? Jimin asked. Jungkook hesitated. Then he answered honestly. Because I was scared you'd disappear. The simplicity of the confession hit harder than the first one. Jimin's chest tightened. You really thought I'd do that? I didn't know, Jungkook admitted. Jimin stared at the wet pavement. Then he laughed softly, but it wasn't amusement. You're not the only one who's been pretending. Jungkook looked up. What does that mean? Jimin didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked past Jungkook, heading toward a row of closed cafes across the street. Jungkook followed quickly. Jimin. No response. Jimin. Jimin stopped under the awning of a dark cafe. Water dripped from the edge of the roof behind him like a curtain. He turned slowly. You want honesty, Jimin said. Jungkook nodded. Jimin inhaled deeply. 3 years ago, he said, I almost told you the same thing. Jungkook froze. What? Jimin laughed quietly, shaking his head. Yeah, surprising, right? Why didn't you? Because you were dating someone. Jungkook's eyebrows shot up. That lasted 2 months. Exactly. And you stayed silent for 3 years because of that. Jimin looked embarrassed. You looked happy. Jungkook stared at him in disbelief. You idiot. Excuse me. You should have said something. Oh really? Jimin shot back. Because you're doing such a great job with timing. Jungkook ran a hand through his hair. This is ridiculous. Jimin leaned against the cafe window. Tell me about it. They both fell silent again. Rainwater slid slowly down the glass beside Jimin's shoulder. Jungkook suddenly started laughing. Jimin frowned. What's funny? We are both terrible at this. At what? Feelings. Jimin rolled his eyes. You're just realizing that. Jungkook stepped closer again. This time the distance between them was barely a step. So what now? Jungkook asked. Jimin met his gaze. That's the dangerous question. Why? Because once we answer it, there's no pretending anymore. Jungkook didn't look afraid. Good. Jimin studied his face carefully. You really want this? I wouldn't have said anything if I didn't. Jimin's voice dropped. You know people will talk. They already do. You know it could complicate everything. Everything's already complicated. Jimin looked at him for a long moment. The street was completely empty now. Only the faint hum of distant traffic filled the air. You're stubborn, Jimin said finally. Jungkook smiled slightly. You like that about me? Jimin pushed away from the window. Don't get confident. Too late. Jungkook stepped even closer, close enough that Jimin could see tiny droplets of rain clinging to his eyelashes. Say it again, Jungkook said. Say what? That you might feel the same. Jimin hesitated. Jungkook's voice softened. Please. Jimin swallowed. Then he said it quietly. I think I've loved you longer than I admitted to myself. Jungkook didn't move. For a moment, he simply stared at him, processing the words. Then he exhaled a shaky laugh. Wow. Jimin smirked slightly. You asked. No, Jungkook shook his head. I didn't expect that to feel this real. Jimin folded his arms. What did you expect? I thought you'd punch me. Tempting. Jungkook laughed again. Then the laughter faded as he looked at Jimin more seriously. So we're really doing this? Jimin raised an eyebrow. Doing what exactly? Jungkook gestured vaguely between them. This. Jimin pretended to think about it. HM. Jungkook groaned. You're enjoying this too much. A little. Then Jimin's expression softened. But yeah. Jungkook blinked. Yes. Yeah. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Jungkook suddenly leaned forward and pulled Jimin into a tight hug. The suddenness of it made Jimin grunt. Hey! But he didn't pull away. Jungkook's voice was muffled against his shoulder. You have no idea how long I've wanted to do this. Jimin laughed quietly. You're such a kid. Don't ruin the moment. They stayed like that for a few seconds, the city quiet around them. Then Jimin slowly stepped back. His expression changed. Something thoughtful. Jungkook. Yes. There's still something you don't know. Jungkook frowned slightly. What? Jimin hesitated. The hesitation alone made Jungkook uneasy. Jimin. Jimin's voice dropped. Someone else knows about this. Jungkook's eyebrows furrowed. What are you talking about? Jimin looked down the empty street as if expecting someone to appear. 3 days ago, he said quietly, someone asked me if we were hiding something. Jungkook felt a chill run through him. Who? Jimin finally looked back at him. Taehyung. Jungkook's stomach dropped. Wait. Jimin nodded slowly. He said he noticed the way we look at each other. Jungkook rubbed his face in disbelief. You're kidding. I wish. And what did you say? Jimin hesitated. Then he answered honestly. I told him I didn't know what he was talking about. Jungkook groaned. He definitely didn't believe that. Exactly. They stood there quietly for a moment, letting the implications sink in. Then Jungkook sighed. Well, that's going to be a conversation. Jimin gave a tired smile. Welcome to the beginning of our problems. Jungkook looked at him. Then he laughed again, softer this time. You know what? What? Still worth it. Jimin watched him for a moment before shaking his head with a small smile. The rain had stopped completely now, but the storm they had just stepped into was only beginning. The night had grown strangely quiet after the rain, but the silence between Jungkook and Jimin felt louder than any storm. They stood beneath the cafe awning for a long moment after Jimin mentioned Taehyung's suspicion. The warm glow from the street lamp behind them stretched their shadows across the wet pavement, long and unsteady. Jungkook finally broke the silence. You're telling me he already knows? I didn't say he knows, Jimin replied. You just said he noticed. That's not the same thing. Jungkook ran both hands through his damp hair, packing once across the narrow sidewalk. That's basically the same thing with Taehyung. You know how he is. He notices everything. Jimin watched him quietly. Jungkook stopped packing and looked directly at him. Why didn't you tell me earlier? Jimin shrugged slightly. I didn't think tonight would happen. Jungkook exhaled slowly. The adrenaline from the confession had faded, leaving behind the heavier reality of what they had just stepped into. Did he say anything else? Jungkook asked. Jimin hesitated. That hesitation immediately caught Jungkook's attention. What? Jungkook said. Jimin rubbed the back of his neck. He asked if you were the reason I've been acting strange lately. Jungkook blinked. Strange. Jimin sighed. You know, distracted, quiet, irritable. You're always a little irritable. Not helpful. Jungkook leaned against the cafe wall beside him. So what did you say? I said he was imagining things. Jungkook laughed softly. He definitely didn't buy that. No, he stared at me for like 10 seconds and then said, You're a terrible liar, Jimin. Jungkook smirked. He's not wrong. Jimin shot him a look. You're enjoying this too much. A little. Jimin crossed his arms. This isn't funny. Jungkook's smile faded slightly when he saw the seriousness in Jimin's face. You're worried. Of course I'm worried. About Taehyung. About everything. Jungkook turned his body toward him. Hey. Jimin looked up. We just figured something important out tonight, Jungkook said quietly. Don't ruin it by jumping straight into panic mode. Jimin scoffed. You're the one who just had a mini meltdown about Taehyung noticing. That's different. How? Jungkook hesitated, then admitted honestly. Because I know how people talk. Jimin's gaze softened slightly. You think I do? Jungkook didn't respond. Jimin sighed and looked down the empty street. Things like this become rumors quickly. And rumors turn into stories. Jungkook folded his arms. So let them talk. Jimin stared at him. You're serious? Yes. You're really saying that right now? Jungkook nodded. Jimin shook his head slowly. You're either incredibly brave or incredibly reckless. Jungkook grinned slightly. Why not both? Jimin tried to hide a small smile but failed. You're impossible, yet somehow charming. Debatable. They fell quiet again. Then Jungkook's expression shifted slightly. Can I ask something? Depends. Have you ever told anyone about how you felt? Jimin looked surprised by the question. No. No one. No one. Jungkook studied his face carefully. Not even Taehyung. Especially not Taehyung. Jungkook laughed. Well. Jimin tilted his head. What about you? Jungkook's smile disappeared. No. Jimin raised an eyebrow. Really? Really? Jimin leaned against the wall again. Not even when you were dating someone. That wasn't serious. You dated for 2 months. And I spent those 2 months thinking about you. Jimin blinked. That's not a comforting detail. Jungkook laughed quietly. I'm being honest. You're being dramatic. You started it. Jimin rolled his eyes. Did you at least like her? She was nice. That's the worst description of a girlfriend I've ever heard. Jungkook shrugged. She deserved someone who was actually paying attention. Jimin looked at him carefully. You ended it because of me. Jungkook hesitated, then nodded slightly. Yeah. Jimin looked genuinely stunned. You never told me that. I wasn't exactly proud of it. Jimin rubbed his temple. This is starting to feel like we've both been living inside some weird secret story. Jungkook smirked. Sounds romantic. Sounds stressful. Jungkook pushed away from the wall. You worry too much. And you don't worry enough. That's why we balance each other. Jimin was about to respond when a voice suddenly cut through the quiet street. You two look suspiciously intense for people standing outside a closed cafe at midnight. Both of them froze. They turned slowly. Taehyung stood across the street under another street lamp, hands in the pockets of his jacket, watching them with a dangerously amused expression. Jungkook's heart dropped straight into his stomach. Speak of the devil, Jungkook muttered. Jimin closed his eyes briefly. Of course. Taehyung crossed the street slowly, his shoes splashing through shallow puddles. You know, he said casually, I had a feeling I might find you somewhere together tonight. Neither Jungkook nor Jimin answered immediately. Taehyung stopped a few steps away. His eyes moved between them with quiet curiosity. Interesting atmosphere, he said. Jungkook forced a laugh. What are you doing here? Late walk. At midnight. Taehyung shrugged. Insomnia. Then he tilted his head slightly. So. The word hung in the air. Jimin sighed. So what? Taehyung gestured vaguely between them. You two going to tell me what's happening here? Nothing's happening, Jimin said quickly. Taehyung's eyebrows rose. That was the fastest lie I've heard all week. Jungkook snorted. Jimin elbowed him immediately. Stop helping. Taehyung chuckled. I knew it. Knew what? Jungkook asked cautiously. That something weird was going on. Jimin crossed his arms. You're being dramatic. Taehyung stepped closer. Am I? His eyes locked onto Jungkook. You've been staring at him like he's the last person on Earth for months. Jungkook nearly choked. Jimin's face flushed immediately. That's not. And you, Taehyung continued calmly, turning to Jimin, get weirdly defensive anytime someone mentions Jungkook's name. Jimin opened his mouth but couldn't find words. Taehyung smiled slowly. I'm not stupid. The silence that followed was thick. Jungkook finally spoke. So you figured it out. Taehyung stuttered him. Did I? Jimin groaned quietly. This is a nightmare. Taehyung laughed. Relax, I'm not judging. Jungkook blinked. You're not. Taehyung shrugged again. Why would I? Jimin looked skeptical. Because people usually do. Taehyung's expression softened slightly. I'm not people. The tension eased a little. But not completely. Taehyung glanced between them again. So how long? Jimin groaned again. Please don't start interrogating us. Too late, Taehyung said cheerfully. Jungkook rubbed his face. Tonight. Taehyung blinked. Tonight. We just talked about it. Taehyung looked genuinely surprised. You mean you two idiots only figured this out now? Jimin pointed at him. See, this is exactly why I didn't tell you. Taehyung laughed loudly. I can't believe this. Jungkook sighed. You're taking this suspiciously well. Taehyung looked at him thoughtfully. Do you want the honest answer? Yes. I've been waiting for this for like a year. Both of them stared at him. What? Jimin said. Taehyung nodded confidently. You two are painfully obvious. Jungkook buried his face in his hands. This is humiliating. Taehyung grinned. Don't worry, your secret is safe with me. Jimin narrowed his eyes. That sounded threatening. Maybe a little. Then Taehyung's tone softened. But seriously, I'm happy for you. The sincerity in his voice caught both of them off guard. Jungkook lowered his hands. You mean that? Yeah. Jimin studied him carefully. You're not going to tease us about this forever. Taehyung smiled mischievously. Oh, I definitely am. Jimin groaned. But I won't tell anyone, Taehyung added. The relief that passed through both of them was visible. Jungkook exhaled deeply. Thank you. Taehyung waved a hand dismissively. Just promise me one thing. Jimin frowned. What? Taehyung's expression turned unexpectedly serious. Don't hurt each other. The weight of those words settled quietly between them. Jungkook glanced at Jimin. Jimin met his eyes. Neither of them answered immediately. But the understanding between them was clear. They had stepped into something fragile. Something powerful. Something that could either strengthen them or break them completely. And for the first time that night, the reality of that truth felt bigger than the rain, the secrets, and the quiet city glowing around them. The street felt smaller after Taehyung's words. The rain had stopped completely now, but the pavement still shimmered under the lamps, reflecting the three of them like distorted silhouettes in water. Jungkook shifted his weight, glancing at Jimin before looking back at Taehyung. You're being weirdly calm about this, Jungkook said. Taehyung tilted his head. You expected screaming. I expected something louder. Taehyung chuckled softly. Trust me, I had my suspicions for a while. Jimin groaned and covered his face with one hand. This is humiliating. Taehyung pointed at him. You say that, but the way you two look at each other is practically a public announcement. Jimin dropped his hand and glared. We do not look at each other in some obvious way. Taehyung raised an eyebrow. You literally stared at Jungkook like he was about to disappear 10 minutes ago. That's not. And Jungkook, Taehyung continued smoothly, has this habit of following you with his eyes even when you're across the room. Jungkook blinked. Wait, I do not. Taehyung laughed. Oh, you absolutely do. Jimin turned to Jungkook slowly. You follow me with your eyes. Jungkook immediately became defensive. That sounds creepy when you say it like that. Because it is creepy. I'm not doing it on purpose. Taehyung leaned against the cafe wall, clearly enjoying the chaos he had created. This conversation is better than anything on TV. Jimin sighed heavily. I can't believe this. Jungkook rubbed the back of his neck, glancing between them. So, how much exactly have you noticed? Taehyung smirked. You really want the list? Jimin groaned again. Please no. Taehyung ignored him. First time I noticed something weird was during rehearsal 3 months ago. Jungkook stiffened slightly. What happened? Taehyung pointed at Jimin. You tripped. Jimin frowned. I trip all the time. Yes, but Jungkook reacted like someone had just pushed you off a cliff. Jungkook immediately protested. That's not true. Taehyung laughed. You nearly tackled the guy who bumped into him. Jungkook's ears turned red. That was instinct. Jimin stared at him. You never told me that. Because it wasn't a big deal. Taehyung shook his head. It was definitely a big deal. The tension between them was shifting now. The initial shock had faded, replaced with an uneasy mix of embarrassment and curiosity. Jimin looked at Jungkook carefully. How many people have noticed? Jungkook hesitated. Taehyung answered first. Probably more than you think. Jimin groaned again. This keeps getting worse. Jungkook sighed. Okay, but noticing something isn't the same as knowing. Taehyung shrugged. True. Jimin looked at him sharply. You're not going to tell anyone. Taehyung raised both hands in mock surrender. I said I wouldn't. Jimin studied his face. You're terrible at keeping secrets. Taehyung smirked. I'm excellent at keeping interesting ones. Jungkook folded his arms. That doesn't sound reassuring. Taehyung's expression softened slightly. I'm serious, I won't say anything. A brief silence passed. Then Taehyung suddenly grinned. But I do have questions. Jimin immediately pointed a finger at him. No interrogation. Too late. Jungkook chuckled quietly. You walked into that one. Jimin looked betrayed. You're supposed to be on my side. I am. Then stop encouraging him. Taehyung laughed. I just want to know one thing. Jimin groaned. What? Taehyung looked between them carefully. Who fell first? Jungkook answered instantly. Me. Jimin turned to him in shock. You answered that way too fast. Taehyung's eyes widened. Oh wow. Jungkook shrugged slightly. It's true. Jimin stared at him. How long exactly? Jungkook hesitated. 3 years. Jimin's jaw dropped. 3 Jungkook. Taehyung burst out laughing. This is unbelievable. Jimin pointed at Jungkook again. You've been carrying that around for 3 years. Give or take. And you said nothing. You also said nothing. That's different. How? Jimin struggled for an answer. Taehyung wiped tears from his eyes from laughing. You two are the most dramatic people I know. Jungkook shook his head. At least I confessed. Jimin scoffed. After 3 years. Better late than never. Taehyung crossed his arms thoughtfully. So what happens now? The question lingered in the air. Jimin and Jungkook exchanged a brief glance. Neither of them had an immediate answer. Jungkook finally spoke. We figure it out. Taehyung tilted his head. That sounds vague. Jimin sighed. Because it is. The quiet street suddenly felt heavier. Jungkook looked at Jimin again. This is the part where you start worrying about everything. I was already worrying. Taehyung studied them carefully. You're both overthinking. Jimin scoffed. You say that like it's easy. Taehyung shrugged. Feelings are messy. You either deal with them or pretend they don't exist. Jungkook smiled faintly. That's basically what we've been doing for years. Taehyung nodded. Exactly. Jimin looked at Jungkook again. So what now? Jungkook stepped a little closer to him. The movement was small but deliberate. Now we stop pretending. Jimin's heart skipped slightly at the quiet certainty in Jungkook's voice. Taehyung watched the moment carefully. Then he smirked. You two realize you're standing extremely close right now. Jimin immediately stepped back. Taehyung. What? I'm just observing. Jungkook laughed under his breath. You're enjoying this way too much. Taehyung grinned. Oh, absolutely. Jimin rubbed his face. I need sleep. Same, Jungkook admitted. Taehyung pushed himself away from the wall. Well, this has been the most entertaining midnight walk I've had in years. Jimin looked at him suspiciously. You're not going to bring this up tomorrow. Taehyung pretended to think about it. I might tease you a little. Jimin groaned. But I won't expose you, Taehyung said more gently. Jungkook nodded. Thanks. Taehyung waved casually. Just don't make things awkward. Jimin raised an eyebrow. Too late. Taehyung laughed. Fair. He stepped away from them, walking backward down the sidewalk. Good night, lovebirds. Jimin immediately shouted, Stop calling us that. Taehyung only laughed louder before turning and disappearing down the street. The quiet returned again. Jungkook looked at Jimin. Well, that went better than expected. Jimin exhaled slowly. I'm still recovering from the embarrassment. Jungkook smiled softly. You're cute when you're embarrassed. Jimin stared at him. Don't start. Start what? That. Jungkook laughed. You're the one who said you might love me. I said I think I have. Same difference. Jimin shook his head. You're insufferable. Jungkook took a step closer again. But you like me. Jimin looked up at him. For a moment, the teasing faded. The night was quiet again. Just the two of them. You realize everything feels different now, Jimin said quietly. Jungkook nodded. Yeah. Are you scared? Jungkook thought about it for a second. A little. Jimin nodded slowly. Me too. Jungkook reached out and gently took Jimin's hand again. This time, Jimin didn't react with surprise. He just looked down at their hands for a moment before sighing softly. We are really doing this. Jungkook smiled. Looks like it. Jimin squeezed his hand slightly. The city around them felt calmer now. But somewhere deep beneath the quiet, both of them could feel the truth waiting ahead. This wasn't just the beginning of something exciting. It was the beginning of something complicated. And neither of them knew yet how much their lives were about to change. The city was quieter than usual when Jungkook and Jimin finally started walking again. The streets still shimmered from the rain, and the air carried that warm summer smell of wet asphalt and night-blooming flowers drifting from somewhere nearby. Taehyung had disappeared down the road minutes ago, but the echo of his teasing voice still lingered in the silence between them. Jungkook's hand was still wrapped around Jimin's. Neither of them had mentioned it. Jimin glanced down at their hands briefly before looking ahead again. You realize we never decided where we were going. Jungkook shrugged slightly. I'm just walking. That's not a destination. It doesn't have to be. Jimin sighed. You're impossible tonight. Jungkook looked sideways at him. Tonight. Fine, always. Jungkook laughed softly. For a moment things felt light again, almost normal. But the tension was still there under the surface. Jimin could feel it in the way Jungkook's fingers occasionally tightened around his hand. Finally, Jimin said quietly, You're nervous. Jungkook blinked. No, I'm not. You are. I'm not. You squeeze my hand every time you're nervous. Jungkook immediately loosened his grip. That's psychological warfare. Jimin smirked slightly. It's observation. Jungkook sighed. Okay, maybe a little. Jimin raised an eyebrow. About what? Jungkook looked ahead at the empty road. Everything that comes after tonight. Jimin's expression softened slightly. You regret saying something. Jungkook stopped walking. Jimin stopped too, turning to face him. Not even a little, Jungkook said. The seriousness in his voice made Jimin pause. Then what's bothering you? Jungkook hesitated. Then he said quietly, What if things change between us? Jimin crossed his arms. They already have. You know what I mean. Jimin studied his face carefully. You're afraid we'll ruin what we already had. Jungkook didn't answer, but the silence was enough. Jimin exhaled slowly. You're not the only one thinking that. Jungkook looked surprised. You are too. Of course I am. Jungkook leaned against a nearby street sign. For years we had this balance. Jimin nodded slowly. Yeah. We never crossed certain lines. Because we were scared. Exactly. Jimin looked down at the pavement. Now we crossed them. Jungkook's voice softened. Do you wish we had? Jimin looked up quickly. No. The answer came too fast to be anything but honest. Jungkook's shoulders relaxed slightly. Jimin continued more quietly, but that doesn't mean it's simple. Jungkook nodded. I know. A warm wind moved down the street, carrying the distant sound of a late-night bus somewhere far away. Jimin rubbed the back of his neck. You know what's strange? What? I've imagined this moment before. Jungkook blinked. You have? Jimin immediately looked embarrassed. Not like that. That sounded exactly like that. Jimin groaned. You're not helping. Jungkook grinned slightly. So what happened in these imaginary moments? Jimin hesitated. Then he sighed. Usually it ended with me panicking. Jungkook laughed. That sounds accurate. Jimin rolled his eyes. And you? Jungkook thought for a moment. In my head, it was always dramatic. Jimin smirked. Of course it was. Like some big confession on a rooftop or something. Jimin gestured around them. You dragged me through a rainstorm instead. Close enough. Jimin shook his head. You're unbelievable. Jungkook stepped closer again. The distance between them shrank to barely a foot. Jimin's breath caught slightly. The streetlight above them buzzed softly. Can I ask something else? Jungkook said quietly. Jimin swallowed. What? Jungkook looked at him carefully. Why did you really stay silent for so long? Jimin hesitated. You already know. You said it was because I was dating someone. That was part of it. Jungkook narrowed his eyes slightly. What was the other part? Jimin looked away. Jungkook noticed immediately. Jimin. Jimin sighed heavily. Because I thought you'd leave. Jungkook frowned. Leave where? Not physically. Jimin met his eyes again. Emotionally. Jungkook's expression shifted. I thought if I said something and you didn't feel the same, things would become awkward. Jungkook listened quietly. You're one of the most important people in my life, Jimin continued. I didn't want to risk losing that. Jungkook looked at him with a mixture of surprise and guilt. That's exactly what I was afraid of too. Jimin laughed softly. So we were both cowards. Pretty much. They stood there for a moment, the irony settling between them. Then Jungkook suddenly said, You know what's funny? What? We could have been having this conversation years ago. Jimin smirked. Or we could have completely destroyed everything years ago. Jungkook shrugged. Also possible. Jimin stepped closer now. So tell me something honestly. Okay. What exactly do you expect from this? Jungkook blinked. What do you mean? Jimin gestured between them. This. Jungkook looked thoughtful. I don't know yet. That's comforting. Jungkook chuckled. I mean, I know what I want. Jimin waited. Jungkook looked directly into his eyes. I want to see where this goes. Jimin's heart beat faster. And if it goes somewhere complicated? Jungkook smiled faintly. Then we deal with complicated. Jimin shook his head. You make it sound easy. It won't be. Jimin studied him carefully. You're serious about this? Very. Jimin's voice dropped slightly. You're not just caught up in the moment. Jungkook shook his head slowly. I've had 3 years to think about this moment. The honesty in that statement hung heavily in the air. Jimin exhaled quietly. You're really something else. Jungkook smiled. You like that? Jimin looked away quickly. Don't get cocky. Jungkook laughed softly. Then something unexpected happened. A car suddenly turned the corner at the end of the street, its headlights sweeping across them. Instinctively, Jimin stepped back. Jungkook noticed immediately. You okay? Jimin nodded quickly. Yeah. But Jungkook frowned. That was weird. What? You moved away fast. Jimin shrugged. Reflex. Jungkook studied him carefully. You're worried about being seen. Jimin hesitated. Then he said quietly, wouldn't you be? Jungkook thought about it. Maybe a little. Jimin looked at him. A little. Jungkook shrugged again. I don't want to hide. Jimin stared at him. That's easy to say. Why? Because you're fearless. Jungkook laughed. You think I'm fearless. You run into emotional disasters without hesitation. That's confidence. That's chaos. Jungkook smiled. Maybe. Jimin looked down the road again. But people noticing things, that part scares me. Jungkook's voice softened. Hey. Jimin looked back. We don't have to figure out everything tonight. Jimin nodded slowly. I know. Jungkook squeezed his hand again. But we're not going backwards either. Jimin looked at their hands. Then back at Jungkook. No, he said quietly. We are not. The wind picked up slightly again, carrying the scent of rain fading into the warm night. For a moment, they simply stood there together. Two people who had spent years dancing around the truth. Now standing in it. And even though the future was uncertain, one thing was clear between them. Neither of them wanted to go back to pretending anymore. The night should have been calm after everything that had already happened, but the quiet street seemed to carry a strange tension that neither Jungkook nor Jimin could ignore. They were still standing beneath the dim streetlight, hands loosely linked, when Jimin finally pulled his hand away and exhaled slowly. Jungkook immediately noticed. You pulled away. Jimin glanced at him. I needed to think. That sounds dangerous. It is. Jungkook leaned back slightly against the metal pole of the street sign, studying Jimin's face. The warm glow of the lamp above them cast soft shadows under Jimin's eyes, making him look more tired than usual. You're spiraling again, Jungkook said. I'm being realistic. You're overthinking. Jimin gave a quiet laugh that carried more tension than amusement. You confessed to me less than an hour ago. Taehyung already suspects something, and we are standing in the middle of a street acting like nothing huge just happened. Of course, I'm thinking. Jungkook pushed himself off the pole. What exactly are you thinking about? Jimin hesitated. Then he said it. Whether this is going to destroy us. The bluntness of it made Jungkook freeze for a second. Destroy us. Jimin folded his arms. You asked for honesty. I did, Jungkook admitted, but that's a pretty extreme thought. Jimin shook his head. You're looking at the emotional side of this. And you're not. I am, Jimin said quietly, but I'm also looking at everything else. Jungkook narrowed his eyes slightly. Meaning? Jimin glanced around the empty street, lowering his voice instinctively. Our lives are not private. Jungkook's expression hardened a little. Are you saying this because of work? I'm saying this because the world we live in is complicated. Jungkook stepped closer. So what are you suggesting, that we pretend tonight never happened? Jimin's eyes flashed immediately. I didn't say that. It sounded like that. I'm trying to be careful. Jungkook ran a frustrated hand through his hair. Careful is what we've been doing for years. And that protected us. Protected us from what? Jungkook said sharply, being honest. Jimin looked irritated now. From turning everything upside down. Jungkook stared at him for a moment. Then he said quietly, you're scared. Jimin didn't deny it. Yes. Jungkook crossed his arms. Of me. Of what happens next. The tension between them grew heavier. Jungkook's voice softened slightly. Do you trust me? Jimin blinked. Of course I trust you. Then trust this. Jimin looked frustrated. It's not that simple. Jungkook suddenly laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. You know what's funny? What? I thought you'd be the brave one tonight. Jimin frowned. What's that supposed to mean? Jungkook shrugged. You're always the one who acts like you understand everything. That's not. But right now, you're talking like this is a mistake. Jimin's eyes widened slightly. I never said that. You didn't have to. The words hung in the air like a sudden crack of thunder. Jimin stepped closer now, his voice sharper. Don't twist my words. I'm not twisting anything. You are. Jungkook met his gaze. Then say it clearly. Jimin hesitated. The silence stretched. Jungkook's voice dropped. Say that you don't regret this. Jimin immediately answered. I don't. Then what's the problem? Jimin struggled for a moment. The problem is that feelings don't exist in isolation. Jungkook tilted his head. That sounds like something you read in a psychology book. Jimin ignored the comment. You and I, we're already tangled in each other's lives. Our work, our friends, everything. And if something goes wrong, it won't just be us dealing with it. Jungkook stared at him for a long moment. Then he said something unexpectedly quiet. You think I'd hurt you? The question caught Jimin off guard. What? You're talking like this will explode eventually. That's not what I... Is it? Jimin stopped talking. The silence answered for him. Jungkook exhaled slowly, looking down at the wet pavement. That's disappointing. Jimin frowned. What is? That after all these years, you still think I'd treat this like something temporary. Jimin's chest tightened. I didn't say temporary. But you implied fragile. Everything human is fragile. Jungkook looked back up at him. Not everything. Jimin's voice softened slightly. You're more optimistic than I am. Jungkook shook his head. No, I'm just tired of pretending fear is wisdom. That sentence hit Jimin harder than he expected. For a moment, he didn't respond. A car passed slowly at the far end of the street, headlights sliding across the wet asphalt before fading again. Jimin sighed and rubbed his face. You know what's frustrating? What? You make everything sound simple. Sometimes it is simple. Not this. Jungkook stepped closer again. It can be. How? By deciding that it matters. Jimin looked at him quietly. And if it ends badly? Jungkook shrugged slightly. Then at least it was real. Jimin stared at him. You're really okay with that risk? Yes. Even if we lose the friendship we already have. Jungkook didn't answer immediately. Then he said calmly, I don't think we will. That's confidence. That's knowing you. Jimin's expression softened just a little. You think you know me that well? I do. Jimin looked down briefly, then back up again. You're incredibly stubborn. Jungkook smiled. You like that? Jimin shook his head. I like that you don't run away from things. Neither do you. Jimin laughed quietly. I literally tried to emotionally escape this conversation 10 minutes ago. And you're still here. That was true. Jimin realized it and sighed. You're impossible to argue with. I'm very good at it. Jimin looked at him carefully. You really want to do this? Yes. No hesitation. None. Jimin took a slow breath. Then he said quietly, You're going to make my life complicated. Jungkook's smile widened slightly. Your life was already complicated. Jimin rolled his eyes. You're enjoying this way too much. A little. The tension that had been building between them slowly began to soften again. Jimin leaned back against the cafe window behind him. You know what the worst part is? What? I think you're right. Jungkook blinked. About what? About fear pretending to be wisdom. Jungkook's smile faded into something gentler. Jimin. Jimin looked at him. I've spent years pretending this didn't matter, Jungkook said quietly. I'm done doing that. Jimin studied his face. There was no hesitation there. No doubt. Just quiet certainty. You're serious. Very. Jimin sighed. Then I guess we are both in trouble. Jungkook laughed softly. Probably. Jimin looked at him again, eyes calmer now. But maybe it's worth it. Jungkook's expression warmed. That's the smartest thing you've said tonight. Don't push it. Jungkook took a step closer again. The space between them was small now, the air warm despite the cooling night. Jimin felt his heart beat a little faster. You know, Jungkook said quietly, we've been talking about this for almost an hour. And you still haven't answered one important question. Jimin narrowed his eyes. What question? Jungkook smiled slightly. What happens now? Jimin looked at him for a long moment. Then he sighed softly. I think. He hesitated. Then finished the sentence. I think we stop pretending we are just friends. Jungkook's eyes widened slightly. That sounds like progress. Jimin smirked faintly. Don't get too excited. Too late. The quiet city around them seemed to breathe again as the tension finally eased. Neither of them knew exactly what the future would look like. But for the first time in years, they were no longer standing on opposite sides of the truth. The silence after Jimin's words felt heavier than anything that had come before. For years they had circled around the truth, stepping carefully around invisible lines neither of them dared to cross. Now those lines were gone, erased by rain, confession, and a conversation that had stripped away every excuse they once used to hide. Jungkook was the first to move. He took one slow step closer, then another, until the space between them felt charged with something neither of them could ignore anymore. You realize what you just said, Jungkook murmured. Jimin lifted an eyebrow. I usually do. You said we stop pretending. Yes. Jungkook tilted his head slightly, studying his face as if trying to understand something deeper than the words themselves. So what does that look like? Jimin hesitated. For someone who usually had answers ready, he suddenly felt very aware that the future had no script. I don't know yet, he admitted. Jungkook smiled faintly. That's a first. Jimin crossed his arms. You're enjoying this uncertainty a little too much. I'm enjoying the honesty. Jimin glanced away briefly, then back at him. You're not nervous anymore. Jungkook shrugged. I am, but it's a different kind of nervous now. What kind? The kind that feels exciting. Jimin stared at him for a second before laughing quietly. You're ridiculous. Maybe. The streetlight flickered again above them, buzzing softly as if reacting to the tension still humming in the air. Jimin shifted slightly where he stood against the cafe window. You know, he said thoughtfully, there's something that still doesn't make sense to me. Jungkook leaned a shoulder against the wall beside him. What? If you've been feeling this for 3 years, why tonight? Jungkook didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked up at the dark sky above the buildings. The rain clouds had started to thin, revealing scattered stars. I guess I got tired of waiting, he said quietly. For what? For the perfect moment. Jimin nodded slowly. There's no such thing. Exactly. Jimin studied his face again. You almost didn't do it, didn't you? Jungkook laughed under his breath. I nearly backed out when we reached the park. Really? Yeah. What stopped you? Jungkook looked directly at him. You smiled. Jimin blinked. That's it. You have this habit, Jungkook continued, when you're happy but trying to hide it. Your eyes curve first before your mouth does. Jimin stared at him. You notice things like that. I notice everything about you. The quiet intensity of the statement made Jimin's heart skip. Jungkook. I mean it, Jungkook said softly. That's how I knew this wasn't something I could keep ignoring. Jimin exhaled slowly. That's a lot. Jungkook grinned. You're overwhelmed. Maybe a little. That's fair. Jimin rubbed his temple. You just dropped 3 years of hidden feelings on me tonight. And you dropped 3 years of hidden feelings back. Touché. They both laughed softly, the tension easing again. But the moment didn't stay light for long. Jungkook's gaze drifted to the street behind Jimin. Then his expression changed slightly. Someone's coming. Jimin turned instinctively. A figure was walking toward them from the corner, steps slow but purposeful. As the person stepped into the streetlight, Jimin's eyes widened. Are you serious? Jungkook groaned quietly. Not again. Taehyung stopped a few feet away, holding a convenience store bag and looking extremely amused. Did you two seriously stay in the exact same spot this whole time? Jimin threw his hands up. Why are you back? Taehyung lifted the bag. Snacks. That's not an answer. Taehyung shrugged. I walked past and saw you still standing here looking intense. I had to check. Jungkook rubbed his face. You're unbelievable. Taehyung glanced between them, eyes sharp despite his casual posture. So, he said slowly, did the emotional debate progress? Jimin groaned. You're enjoying this too much. Absolutely. Taehyung took a sip from a canned drink he had pulled from the bag. You know what the funniest part is? No, Jungkook muttered, but I'm sure you'll tell us. Taehyung grinned. You two arguing about fear and feelings while holding hands earlier. Jimin froze. You saw that. Taehyung nodded casually. From the corner. Jimin covered his face. I'm moving to another country. Jungkook laughed quietly despite himself. Taehyung looked at Jungkook. You seem less panicked than him. Jungkook shrugged. I've accepted chaos. Jimin glared at both of them. This is not chaos. Taehyung raised an eyebrow. You confessed in the rain, argued about the emotional consequences, and now you're standing under a streetlight like a scene from a drama. Jimin pointed at him. Stop narrating our lives. Taehyung laughed. Too late. Jungkook pushed away from the wall. Did you come back just to mock us? Partly. Jimin sighed. You're exhausting. Taehyung's expression softened slightly. But also to check something. Jungkook frowned. What? Taehyung looked directly at both of them. You're actually serious about this, right? The tone was different now. Less teasing. More careful. Jimin glanced at Jungkook before answering. Yes. Jungkook nodded. Very. Taehyung studied their faces quietly. Then he exhaled. Okay. Jimin blinked. That's it. What were you expecting? I don't know, another lecture. Taehyung shook his head. No lecture. He hesitated slightly before adding. But there's something you should know. Jungkook and Jimin both looked at him. Taehyung's usual playful expression faded. You're not as subtle as you think. Jimin groaned again. You already said that. I mean really not subtle. Jungkook frowned. What are you implying? Taehyung hesitated. Then he said carefully, someone else asked me about you two last week. The air between them instantly changed. Jimin straightened. Who? Taehyung looked uncomfortable now. That's the problem. Jungkook's voice lowered. Taehyung. Taehyung sighed. It was a manager. Jimin's stomach dropped. What? They asked if something was going on between you. Jungkook's expression hardened. And what did you say? I said they were imagining things. The tension that followed was sharp and immediate. Jimin felt his pulse spike. You're serious? Taehyung nodded slowly. Very. Jungkook looked away for a moment, jaw tight. So the rumors are already starting. Taehyung shrugged. Not rumors yet, just curiosity. Jimin ran a hand through his hair, suddenly restless. This is exactly what I was worried about. Jungkook looked back at him. And this is exactly why hiding forever wouldn't work either. Taehyung watched the two of them carefully. You're standing at the edge of something complicated. Jimin gave a quiet laugh. We noticed. Taehyung nodded. But complicated doesn't always mean wrong. Jungkook glanced at Jimin again. Their eyes met. The tension that had been building all night returned, but it felt different now. Mori real. Mori serious. Jimin finally spoke quietly. So what do we do? Taehyung stepped back slightly. That part isn't my decision. Jungkook answered before Jimin could. We keep going. Jimin looked at him. You're sure? Yes. Jimin studied his face for a long moment. Then he sighed. Of course you are. Jungkook smiled faintly. And you're still here. Jimin looked down at the wet pavement. Then back up again. Yes, he said softly. I am. Morning arrived slowly, like the city itself was unsure whether it should disturb what had happened during the night. The streets that had glowed with rain and secrets hours before were now pale under early sunlight. The pavement had dried in uneven patches, leaving faint marks where the storm had passed. Jungkook hadn't slept. Neither had Jimin. They had eventually parted ways near dawn, not because they wanted to, but because the quiet night that had protected their honesty was ending. The world they lived in, the one filled with schedules, expectations, and watching eyes, was waking up again. Jungkook sat by the wide window of his apartment, elbows resting on his knees, staring at the city below. Everything felt different. Not in a dramatic, explosive way, but in the quiet shift of gravity. For years, his life had moved forward with a certain rhythm. Work, practice, laughter with friends, late-night conversations with Jimin that always ended just before crossing a line they pretended not to see. Now the line was gone. And strangely, the world hadn't collapsed. His phone buzzed on the table. He looked down. A message. From Jimin. Jungkook stared at the screen for a moment before opening it. You didn't sleep either, did you? A small smile formed on his face. He typed back. No. 3 dots appeared immediately. I figured. Jungkook leaned back in the chair. How can you tell? The reply came a few seconds later. Because you're the type who overthinks everything after making a big decision. Jungkook laughed quietly. That sounds more like you. Don't project. Jungkook stared at the phone again, then typed something slower this time. Are you okay? There was a longer pause before the reply came. Yes. Another message followed. Just thinking. Jungkook understood that feeling. About the manager. About everything. Jungkook looked out the window again at the morning traffic slowly filling the streets. Regretting it. The typing dots appeared again. They stayed longer this time. Finally, the message came. No. Jungkook exhaled softly. Good. A few seconds later, another message appeared. But I am scared. Jungkook smiled faintly. Me too. The next message came almost instantly. Look at that. What? You admitted fear without arguing. Jungkook chuckled. Don't get used to it. A few moments passed before Jimin wrote again. Jungkook. Yes. Last night you said something that stuck with me. What? You said you were tired of pretending fear was wisdom. Jungkook leaned back, remembering the moment. Yeah. I think you were right. Jungkook felt warmth spread through his chest. That might be the first time you've admitted I'm right. Don't push your luck. They both went quiet again. Not the uncomfortable silence from earlier in the night, but the calm kind that happens when two people are thinking about the same thing. Jungkook typed again. Taehyung will definitely tease us today. That's the least of our problems. True. Another pause. Then Jimin wrote something that made Jungkook sit up straighter. But he was right about something. What? He said complicated doesn't mean wrong. Jungkook stared at the words for a long moment. Then he typed, I'm glad you believe that. Another pause. Then Jimin's final message came. Do you still want to see where this goes? Jungkook didn't hesitate. Yes. The reply came almost instantly. Good. Another message followed. Because I do too. Jungkook smiled, leaning his head back against the chair as sunlight slowly filled the room. Outside, the city was fully awake now. Cars moved through intersections. People hurried along sidewalks. The world continued exactly as it always had. But for Jungkook and Jimin, something fundamental had shifted. Not with fireworks, not with dramatic declarations shouted to the world, but with quiet honesty shared beneath a streetlight after summer rain. They didn't know how complicated things might become. They didn't know how many challenges waited ahead. But they also knew something else now. For years, fear had kept them silent, and silence had kept them safe. But safety had never felt as alive as the truth. Somewhere across the city, Jimin was probably standing by another window, thinking the same thing. That sometimes the most important step forward begins with something as simple as two people finally admitting what they mean to each other. Not because the path ahead is easy, but because some feelings are too real to spend a lifetime pretending they don't exist. And so their story didn't end with the rain. It began there.